Hi, I'm Calvin.
Hello, my name is Mansukh Singh.
And I'm Sam, and this is going to be a feasibility study of reducing overcrowding in American jails and prisons. So, what is America's situation? Well, as of mid-year 2023, 12% of jail jurisdictions are operating above their rated capacity. That's about an eighth of prisons in America being overcrowded. This means that although America's situation isn't as dire as other countries, like how on the graph on the right shows America is actually in the upper quartile of least overcrowded nations, it's still a present national problem that needs addressing. In this presentation, we will address the feasibility that the United States can actually solve this problem nationally and avert crisis.
In terms of technical feasibility, reducing prison overcrowding isn't just a policy problem, it's a data problem. To begin addressing it, jurisdictions need comprehensive and up-to-date analytics on individual offenders. Currently, the Bureau of Justice Statistics collects strong baseline data, things like incarceration rates by sex, ethnicity, and age, along with information on admissions, recidivism, and conviction status. But what's missing is the context. We don't have consistent national data on case processing time, parole eligibility versus actual release, or factors influencing sentence length. This lack of contextual data makes it hard to pinpoint bottlenecks in the justice process or fairness issues. With more detailed operational and contextual data like staffing ratios, program completion rates, and rehabilitation outcomes, jurisdictions could begin using powerful modeling tools. For instance, queuing models could simulate inmate intake and release to identify delays or capacity constraints. Agent-based models could include individual factors like risk ratings, rehabilitation outcomes to predict how changes in policy like pretrial release or early release affect the system as a whole. These tools can safely reduce overcrowding by identifying low-risk inmates for community-based alternatives. So, from a technical standpoint, all of this is feasible. The data collection methods and modeling tools already exist. It's just a matter of integrating and standardizing data across jurisdictions. The real challenge isn't technology, it's governance and legacy systems. Now, operational feasibility looks at whether the systems, staff, and infrastructure can actually support these reforms. One critical area is the release and supervision system. By implementing data-driven pretrial alternatives and case management tools, you can reduce the unnecessary inflow of inmates. But this requires proper infrastructure like judicial dashboards, case tracking, and court reminder systems to make those alternatives possible. Another operational focus is building up community-based alternatives, like diversion programs for individuals with mental health, substance use, or housing issues. These approaches work, but only if jurisdictions have the local capacity, coordination, and sustainable funding to support them. The good news is that the operational pathways are already known. For example, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime lays out clear steps: data collection, justice reform strategies, crime prevention, and public support. So we know what needs to be done. It's just a matter of doing it. However, there are serious roadblocks. Many jurisdictions rely on outdated, disconnected systems that make it hard to share or analyze data. Staffing shortages and high infrastructure costs, like building new facilities, also divert resources away from reform. Still, overall, reforming overcrowding is operationally feasible. As long as we invest in modern data systems, training, staffing, and coordination. The main challenge isn't a lack of solutions, but the difficulty of aligning resources and systems across the entire judicial process.
So, we have answered whether it would be operationally feasible to solve overcrowding in the United States, but is it financially feasible? What most people think of when financial feasibility is mentioned in regards to overcrowded jails and prisons is how much it's going to cost to add more jails and prisons. However, the main reason overcrowding is occurring is understaffing. In fact, the Bureau of Labor Statistics predicts that correctional officers and jailers will decrease by 8% from 2024 to 2034, as you can see on this graph. In fact, Colorado spent $47 million to renovate a jail, but they still can't fully staff it. Keep in mind, they offered cash bonuses to people who were willing to take the job. So what about other solutions? Well, 42% of people in jail are detained pre-trial because they can't afford to post bail. This isn't just a big reason for overcrowded jails, but a massive waste of billions of tax dollars to house those who can't afford to pay for their freedom. The reason why this hasn't been implemented is fear of recidivism or the action of repeated crime. Essentially, what if the person that is let walk free before in their pretrial commits another crime? Well, studies show this isn't the case. This study by the Harry Frank Guggenheim Foundation actually found that in all 11 jurisdictions that have implemented bail reforms or ways to mitigate this pretrial holding of people, that it showed no change in crime. So what does this all mean? Well, prisons and jails are being built, but they're understaffed. However, there are other solutions to overcrowding, such as bail reform. But what does this all have to do with financial feasibility? Well, all of these statistics and studies show that overcrowding solutions are not being hindered by finances. Money is already being spent, and solutions that actually save people money, such as the bail reforms, keeping people out of prison, and thus not having to pay for those people, are being implemented in jurisdictions. Either way, yes, this is financially feasible.
Legal feasibility. This section focuses on whether reforms can be done within existing federal and state laws, while still protecting immigrant rights. When we talk about feasibility here, we're really asking, can we make changes that are constitutional, compliant with the building and accessibility codes, and legally funded and managed? My goal is to show you that yes, these reforms are legally feasible as long as they align with proper legal and standard regulations. So constitutional standards. The first and most important legal factor is the Eighth Amendment, which prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. Overcrowding violates this amendment when it leads to unsafe and unhealthy living conditions. A key example of this is the Brown v. Plata case in 2011, where California's prisons were operating at nearly 200% capacity. The Supreme Court ruled that these conditions deprived inmates of basic medical care and dignity, making it unconstitutional. So reducing overcrowding isn't just a policy choice, it's the legal responsibility that states must meet to uphold real human rights and constitutional law. Compliance with codes and standards. Next, there are other legal requirements beyond the constitutional. New or renovated facilities must meet ADA standards, meaning at least 3% of cells must be accessible to inmates with mobility disabilities. Projects also need to comply with building codes, zonings, laws, and located at a safe distance from residential areas. In addition, when governments work with private companies to build or manage prisons, those public-private partnerships must be transparent. This ensures that facilities are not only safe and accessible, but also ethically managed and fair to the community. From a funding and liability perspective, correctional projects are regulated by the 28 CFR Part 91, which offers how states use Department of Justice grants. These laws require states to use funds responsibly and coordinate with local governments throughout the process. Facilities also have to manage liability risks, protecting both inmates and staff from harm, and ensuring that legal responsibilities are clearly defined. In conclusion, reforms to reduce overcrowding are legally feasible as long as they follow constitutional protection, building standards, and federal funding laws. This legal framework already exists. The challenge is implementing it consistently. Environmental feasibility. Now moving on to environmental feasibility. This looks at whether we can reduce overcrowding in ways that don't harm the environment or surrounding communities. The main idea is to find solutions that are both effective and eco-friendly, starting with reducing strain on the environment while still addressing the root cause of overcrowding. When new prisons or expansions are built, they come with serious environmental consequences. These include deforestation, increased water and energy use, and higher greenhouse gas emissions from 24-hour facility operations. Prisons also require large acres of land, which can displace wildlife and reduce community green space. Because of these issues, purely building more facilities is not a sustainable solution. It may temporarily solve capacity problems, but it adds a long-term environmental damage and resource strain. So some of the sustainable alternatives. A more feasible path is through sustainable and non-construction alternatives. Examples include rehabilitation programs, diversion initiatives, and electronic monitoring, all of which reduce inmate populations without the need of new facilities. If construction is absolutely necessary, it should follow green building practices such as LEED certification, using renewable energy efficient HVAC systems and recycled materials. These eco-friendly measures align with EPA sustainability guidelines and help prisons operate more efficiently while lowering their environmental footprint. Finally, under the National Environmental Policy Act, or also known as NEPA, any major construction projects must include an environmental impact assessment and public hearings to ensure community input. This legal framework ensures that development decisions should consider both environmental and social consequences. In summary, reducing overcrowding is environmentally feasible, especially when solutions focus on sustainability and non-construction reforms. Combining these environmental and legal approaches gives us a realistic path to a safer, fairer, and more sustainable correctional system in the US.
There are two main unintended consequences that stem from solutions to overcrowding. There's the consequence that comes from facilities, specifically unmanned facilities, being a waste of tax dollars and causing unnecessary pollution in their construction. And the other unintended consequence is decarceration, creating recidivism. Essentially, people who are not held in jail for their bail, they could still commit crimes. Even though we previously mentioned that this is not statistically proven, that doesn't mean that it's not possible. And there could still be a victim who faces this, and the bail reforms implemented in their jurisdiction are the only cause of that. In conclusion, the overcrowding of prisons and jails in the United States is feasible. In fact, some efforts have already been made in some jurisdictions. However, on a national scale, there is still more work to be done. The future does look optimistic, though, since many reforms and policies have already been implemented. This is because overcrowded prisons and jails are a highly addressed and acknowledged issue in America. With enough time, governments will be able to solve their own overcrowding problems until it is no longer a national issue. This has been our presentation over the feasibility of solving overcrowding in America. Thank you for listening. And here's our citations.